We're now learning that states are getting screwed by members of Congress who have redirected a whopping $2.3 billion in federal funds meant to address clean water needs toward politically advantageous pet projects over the past 2 years. Now, in many cases, these lawmakers cut into money that could have been made available to poorer, needier, and oftentimes minority communities. So let's get into the details here. As a result of these diversions, 38 states and territories have been shortchanged about $660 million in federal water aid. And that's according to data obtained and analyzed by the Washington Post, illustrating how the system often has rewarded politically well-connected lawmakers in some of the wealthiest areas nationwide. So let's back up a second, because this is a part of how government works that some people might not be fully aware of. And it gives you a sense of what the interpersonal, or what explains some of the interpersonal dynamics between members of Congress, why they behave the way they do. When you have a bill like, let's say, Biden's infrastructure bill, which of course allocates a chunk of money towards certain projects. In this case, in what we're talking about right now, we're discussing infrastructure as it pertains to, water, ensuring that we have clean, safe water for communities all across the country. We've had issues with our water infrastructure for quite some time now. That money isn't just simply evenly distributed across all states, not even close. Members of Congress compete with one another in order to get their pet projects in their districts funded through the money that was allocated through that legislation. And what ends up happening is certain communities, by the very nature of this process, get screwed and end up with little to no resources. Okay, so unfortunately the problem is expected to worsen in the coming fiscal year as House Republicans look to cut $1.7 billion to the overall funding that Washington sends to states for their water needs. They want to slash federal water spending by more than half. I mean, think about how insane that is. At a time when, again, we're dealing with crumbling infrastructure, we're dealing with cities that have unsafe drinking water. Flint is still riddled with unsafe drinking water as we speak. But no, you've got an entire political party that is eyeing additional cuts to infrastructure and basically replacing lead pipes and things like that. So how does the redirection of these funds work exactly? So every year Congress appropriates money for 2 federal water funds that are overseen by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. And then they end up distributing the grants to various states. Since 2022, the federal allocation has totaled roughly $5.5 billion, amounting to a literal and figurative drop in the bucket for a nation with an estimated $625 billion backlog in projects just to provide cleaner, reliable drinking water. And lawmakers can reserve federal water aid for specific projects in their home communities using a legislative tool known as earmarks. Now, earmarks serve as legislative sweeteners to essentially incentivize lawmakers to pass major bills by allowing them to steer federal money, federal resources to projects in their districts. Only after earmarks are decided does Washington divvy up and distribute a smaller pool of the remaining money among these states. That's how it works. So in some cases, the result is that the system is a net cut in funding. Really depends on which state you're in, which part of the country you're in. So let's take a look at this graph that the Washington Post put together, and it addresses how each passing year, Democrats and Republicans have redirected an increasing amount of water spending to their own preferred projects, cutting into the money that states could use as they see fit. So you see that every passing year, the amount of money that goes toward earmarks seems to increase. So we're not even in 2024 yet, but obviously this addresses some of the future funding, some of the future allocations. And already for 2024, you see about $880.5 million being earmarked out of the money that is awarded to the states. So let's get to some specific states and what the impact is. So in Illinois, for example, earmarks last year shortchanged the state $14.7 million in federal aid to improve clean water systems. Illinois has some of the greatest water needs in the country, including the second most lead pipes in the United States, a recent federal analysis shows. And over the past 2 fiscal years, another state, Pennsylvania, received about $36 million less than it would have received if lawmakers had not allowed earmarks. For Indiana, the cut totaled roughly $45 million. In Texas, the reduction exceeds $65 million. And congressional earmarks also took away critical water money from, Puerto Rico, which tends to get screwed over quite a bit by the system of government we have here, the way things work in the federal government. And this happened as Puerto Rico was still working on rebuilding after the devastation of Hurricane Fiona in 2022. Let's give you some details on that. Over the past 2 fiscal years, Puerto Rico received roughly $26.6 million less than it would have without the earmarks, and that's according to the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities and the data that they shared with the Washington Post. But look, the problem is exacerbated further. It is made worse by the fact that congressional earmarks really do appear to benefit wealthy communities over needier ones. In states such as Maryland, Massachusetts, and Virginia, fewer than 20% of congressional water earmarks in the 2023 fiscal year went to communities that are considered disadvantaged. Members of Congress decided where to send those dollars, not state officials, who might have directed them to areas in greater need. So I want to back up for a second and address one other problem that I see here. After the Biden administration succeeded in passing legislation that funds infrastructure projects, he made clear that the earmarks need to be allocated to needier, disadvantaged communities. But the problem is the states all define disadvantaged communities in different ways. And there really wasn't an enforcement mechanism to ensure that that money, that those resources were getting to the parts of the country they were meant for. So it's one thing to just declare that you want the money to go in a certain direction. It's something entirely different to include enforcement mechanisms to ensure that that is taking place. Because look, fact of the matter is, members of Congress are going to want to fight for their pet projects and dip into those funds as much as possible for a whole host of reasons. It might help them with re-election. It might assist their corporate donors in a project that they really want. And at the heart of this issue is the problem we're facing in this country with, again, crumbling infrastructure as it pertains to water. The fact that we have multiple parts of the country dealing with lead in their water is insane. And to see that this money is being redirected toward pet projects for federal members of Congress is also incredibly insane to me. Now, just a few more details on this. An unpublished federal study aimed to explore whether earmarks had aligned with an executive order that Biden signed in 2021 that aims to deliver 40% of all federal benefit programs to cities and towns in greatest need, well, showed some pretty terrible results. In total, it found that earmarks in 18 states last year failed to meet that benchmark, depriving disadvantaged communities of an estimated $79 million in water aid. And according to Eric Olson, who is a senior strategic director for health and food at the NRDC, the earmarks basically are taking the money away from low-income communities that really need the funding most to fix their drinking water and putting it into wealthier communities that are often white communities that don't need the money as much. The beneficiaries include the city of Bel Air, Texas, just outside Houston, which scored $2.4 million to replace its water lines last year, with an average household income exceeding $200,000 annually, Bel Air normally might have had to take a loan. Instead, it received a federal grant thanks to Democratic Representative Lizzie Fletcher. So this is a big problem, and I had lots of issues with the legislation that Biden pushed for. It was obviously a watered down version of the legislation he ran on. I had problems with the way that it was being marketed to the public as an incredible landmark piece of legislation that was going to help disadvantaged communities. And I just decided I'm gonna sit back and wait and see how this whole process plays out. Because when push comes to shove, if the wealthier communities are pushing for, voting for, and supporting certain projects, their congressional lawmakers are gonna fight to dip into those resources and get those special projects funded. And this also gives you a sense of why members of Congress interact with one another the way they do. So when we talk about how Democrats, for instance, are usually unwilling to fight other members of their party on various issues, it could be because they don't want to get on someone's bad side when allocating this money toward their pet projects, toward their earmarks, is a priority of theirs, something that they want to push for in order to help their chances of getting reelected. So they don't want to get on anyone's bad side. They're literally playing politics to ensure that they can dip into these funds for their own projects. And it kind of gives you a sense of why those interpersonal relationships occur the way they do, especially on the Democratic side. But I think the system needs a little bit of an overhaul. And one band-aid, I guess, in the short term would be to ensure that there is an enforcement mechanism to get this money to the communities that need it the most. Because the fact that we're literally like funneling more government resources to parts of the country where wealthy people are probably not even paying their fair share of taxes, to be quite honest with you, is ridiculous to me. But this is how the process currently works. These are the flaws in the system, and it's something that we should all know about and work hard to do something about moving forward.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.